Okay. Yeah, so really the difference, so in the media object, we're using the clear after for the floats. So, like the background colors coming across here. And I could get the same effect from this if I just did an overflow hidden on this guy. So that would clear my float. The third way of doing it is having a DOM element afterwards that just has the CSS property of clear both. But you want to avoid having DOM elements that are just for stylistic reasons. And this is fine, but the reason why I don't like recommending that is because of the flexibility of when you get into offsetting something using the position property. So if we have this media object, right, and I'm going to change this because that looks awkward. And inside here, I want to create I'm just going to call it a demo. So inside demo, we're going to also put a smiley face inside here. All right, so we'll just see that guy right there. Now, what I want demo to be is a black box or a black circle. And border radius 50%, and we'll do a height of 1 rem and a width of 1 rem. Actually, let's go 2 rems. And then we'll do a line height, just because it's the easiest way of doing this, 2 rems, and text align center. So now we have this emoji. Ooh. Oh, that's sad. I guess the emojis aren't like, yeah, look at that. It's like off-centered. But that's not my fault. That's the emoji world. They have some weird kerning and line height on them, kerning and leading. But all right, so by default, just because of where this is, it's being listed after the paragraph tag, right? If I wanted to position this somewhere differently, say I wanted, let me add a bunch of different widths inside here. So I'm going to put like 4,000 or add an extra 0 here. So do you see this? Like the scrolls. Now what I could do is say position fix on him, and it remains fixed there. But one of the things that you'll notice is that it lost that height, because once you go into fixed, it removes its calculated height in the container that it is removed. So you would have to offset it if I wanted like that red border there. But there's this, and I can go like right, and it's going to be here. This is being positioned off of the parent container that has a relative position. And because this O media doesn't have a position relative, it is looking for the closest one in the DOM that has a position relative. And if there isn't one that has a position relative, we'll go to the root document, which is the HTML or the root selector. So that's why this is being positioned outside here. When I say right, you'd probably imagine that you'd want it to be over here. But it's going outside there. It's the same thing with absolute. It does the exact same thing, but it's not fixed to the screen. All right, so if I wanted it to go in that corner, for the purpose of this, I'm just going to say O media and say position relative. So now it is being positioned relative to where that is inside here. And if I said bottom, we will see it go into the bottom of that. Now if I remove this, this is going to be at the bottom of my screen down here. So that relative is, this is becoming relative to the parent container. And that's how it works. Now back to the question about the overflow and everything. If I said something like this, so these are 2 rems, if I said -1 rem and -1 rem, you see how this is in this corner and it's going outside that bound. And this is based off of the parent being relative. Now, if I wasn't using this approach and I said overflow hidden, it gets cut off. So sometimes that is the desired look and feel, like especially if you're doing like aesthetics, you want it to have like a hard edge, But in the case of like going outside the bounds, you lose the ability to do that. Where I would say it's better to have overflow hidden as like a utility or a helper to kind of control it for you. So that's the demo on like why that kind of works, and covering just really quickly on some of the positioning stuff here. So let's remove this demo because it's kind of a silly, stupid demo. CodePen liked my tweet. Hey. So let's just put lorem 3. And I'm going to remove this width, but I'm going to keep the background color here, and I'm going to add a white to override that. Before doing anything, so this is going to span the width of that, right? Back to the question earlier, like if I want this to maybe go outside the bounds, or like where does this go? Actually, let's just remove this completely from here. Let's put this in more of a traditional spot here, because I feel like this would be a better use case. That was a weirder one. So we have demo here, and we have this container, and so there are two different containers, right? Now if I put demo and I put position absolute, it's just going to kind of disappear here. Let me show you where that actually is. It's going to be behind it. So it's right behind there because the height gets removed from it. Now if I wanted this to still show up, I can use the Z index, which is the level of where if we turned the browser on its side, it's the layers and which one's going to render on top. So by having a higher index, that means it's on the top. So here, by adding that 1, it's greater than its default user agent, which is 0. So it moves up on top of it. So that's good to know. Absolute, goes there. If I did fixed, now it will stay fixed there at the top. So this is, the treatment. A lot of times that's used for navigation. Now, if I wanted this to be the full width of the browser, so this is almost rendering in fixed or absolute, similar to how a display inline block works. So here we have this. A block goes from one side to another, but if I just say display inline block, it renders the width of it. So that's the same way as like how position and fix works. Now, if I wanted a display inline block to be the full width, I can say 100%, and it goes to full width. Now, the same thing here. If I want this to go the full width, I could say width is 100%, and now it goes the full width. But it also goes out. No, this is perfectly fine. So it goes from one side to another. Another way of also doing this is to say right 0, left 0, and this is actually the preferred method that I like, because there's some, depending on the framework that you're using, if you do 100% width, sometimes it gets into the scroll bar issues in old IEs. So in the Windows world, you have the scroll bar. I think it takes up 12 pixels. And depending on how you have your CSS set up, if you do 100% width, it can cause an overflow on the X, meaning that your 100% width isn't taking into account that scroll bar width. So you have this weird like offset. So that can happen if you do 100% width. If you run into it, this can be the fix for it, saying right 0. So it's looking at the right side of it and it's stretching it to the left. Same thing if I wanted to go from bottom to top. This is how I can do a takeover. So a lot of times when I'm doing like a pop-up, this is a really nice approach for doing it. And that's just one of those like tricks of CSS. So this is a full width, right? Now if I were to maybe put this in a container, so like what we were saying earlier, let's just call this like O container. And this is a long explanation for that very simple question that you asked me, but that's what I do. All right, so we have O container, and let's just say it has a max width of 800 pixels, and then we're going to say margin right, margin right, auto, and then we're going to do the same thing on the left, and this is how you center a container. So now this is a max width of 800 pixels, so once I go here, it goes centered, right? Now, you'll notice that this is going from one side to another side. That's cool, I guess, but that may not be what I want. So if I said like O container right here. So demo is inside there if I said position relative. And I go bigger. Come on. This guy is still going to go outside the bounds because I have this being the right width, but if I do 100%, oops, it will go inside of it. Should at least. Why is that going out? Did I do something wrong here? But anyways, that's not what I was actually going to show you. So inside here, one of the better ways of taking something fixed or absolute, even though you're kind of bound inside here, is to do something like width 100% and then putting a max width to whatever that container is. So I said 800 pixels and saying width is 100%, but my max width is 800 pixels. So if I go bigger, it expands like that. And if I go smaller, it treats it the same way. Now, if I wanted to, say, center this in the middle of the page, so let's remove this right here. And let's move this out here. This can be a little tricky, but you can see that this guy is not being centered, but the rest of it is. When you're dealing with absolutes and relatives, or absolutes and fixed, there's kind of a trickiness to centering. And the version that I like to do is saying left 50%. And the old school way of doing this was margin left negative 400 pixels in the case of this, so half the width, and it centers it in the middle. So you have it like offset and then you're negative doing it. So this was the fix before responsive, but then this runs into issues as we go smaller. So the better fix for this, and this is relative to the width of the container, is to say something like transform, translate, x, negative 50%. So now this is going to offset it, and as I get smaller, it treats it the right way. So if my width actually becomes, say, 600 pixels, it's still going to center it in the middle here. So it gives me a little bit more flexibility. Now, the last thing I want to say about this, remember I brought up that the height kind of goes away here. So if you're going to be doing something like this, let's do this. So we can see this all the way to the top. So overriding the margin 8 pixels by the user agent. You can see that this guy is kind of laying on top of it. And I don't know why I add genders to elements. I was like this guy or her and this. Yeah. It's just something I do. If we add a height to this and it goes bigger than that, you can see that this is going on top of it. One of the ways that I kind of fix this is to create like more of a container that's like C main and like C main intro, C main page. And then that way I can offset it. But in the case of this, you could also do something like demo plus the next div or whatever the next selector is, and say padding top 50 pixels or whatever that width was, 40. So now that is offset right there. So the content here isn't being hidden underneath it. And if I wanted to give it a little bit more space, you could do that. So CSS right now doesn't have a good way of calculating and offsetting that. I wish there was a better way of doing it. Yeah. And you can, right click and inspect it. Now where this gets hard is if this height becomes variable and changes. And there's a bunch of like CSS things that you could do for that. I mean, JavaScript and CSS things. All right, so that's position relative. And about your question about the overflow and the media object and why to do it the clear after. So controlling things, absolute, relative, fixed, some of the issues with it and how they render inside the page and how to center them, and then why those clear floats are kind of important. So that answers that, right?
More than.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So the next thing we're going to move into is looking quickly at an input and the styling of that, because this kind of trickles back over the other sessions that we've gone over and the complexities of input. So form elements are one of the most difficult ones to style.